Hi, I'm Lydia McGrew, and today I'm continuing to talk about so-called seams, S-E-A-M-S, in the Gospel of John. Before I get to the example I want to talk about today, I'm going to address a very natural question. What is the relationship of a scholar's claim that there's a seam in the Gospel of John to the claim of deliberate fact-changing on the part of the author or an author or an editor of the gospel that we actually have? Are seams claims of deliberate fact-changing? I'm bringing up this question because deliberate fact-changing in the Gospels is a big theme of my work on the Gospels. So it might naturally occur to you to wonder. The answer is that usually, in what I've been able to read on seams in the Gospel of John, there is no clear claim by the scholar that this involves deliberate fact-changing. In fact, since it's usually a reference to something that's supposed to be awkward, the idea is that it's non-deliberate, and yet most of these are being treated as errors of some kind. So I would say the implication, certainly from Bart Ehrman when he uses these, is that you have an editor coming along and trying to fit two accounts together and just getting it wrong because he doesn't really know, because the editor wasn't there. So the editor is fitting together various sources and he's making a mistake. Now, if you've been following this YouTube channel for a while, you know that I'm not an inerrantist. I think that the gospel authors sometimes did make good faith errors, non-deliberate errors. But, so you might ask, well, you're not an inerrantist anyway, so why should you care? Well, I care because I want to know what the actual truth is. And because, in fact, I think these are highly reliable documents, so I don't think there are a lot of even good faith errors. So I'm not going to just go, oh, yeah, that's another non-deliberate error, fine, no problem, I'm not an inerrantist, and just accept it willy-nilly. It doesn't work like that. If you think that something is reliable, then you're going to say, what's the evidence that there's even a good faith error here? In these cases of these supposed seams, I don't think that it indicates a good faith error. I don't think that it indicates the involvement of an editor, even one editor. All the more so, I don't think it indicates the involvement of 5 editors, nor do I think that the entire set of them taken together indicates the activity of an editor, much less 5 editors. That was Raymond Brown's theory of 5 layers of editing. And as we'll see in today's discussion of John 3:22, I don't even think that indicates, that particular one indicates achronological narration. Now, I'll try to remember to link in the show notes again to my 4 ways of narrating time video that explains achronological narration. But achronological narration is not erroneous. It's just the author not intending to indicate an actual chronological order or the actual chronological length of time. But I don't even think this one indicates that. We'll see when we get to chapter 5 in John and a supposed pair of seams on either side of chapter 5. Yeah, I think those may indicate non-erroneous achronological narration on the part of the actual author, John the beloved disciple. I don't even think that's indicated here in John 3:22, much less making up an entirely separate person who is an editor who's awkwardly trying to stick these together. Okay, all that being said, let's get to the specific one today, the claim of a seam. Gary Burge accepts this, even though he presents himself as being within the evangelical milieu. He agrees with Bart Ehrman on this case that this is an indication of a seam and of this highly complex process of putting together, building the Gospel of John. So this verse comes right after Jesus has been with Nicodemus in Jerusalem, early in John. And 322, after the author has given some of his own thoughts on what Jesus was saying there with Nicodemus, I'm going to read the translation here from the NASB. After these things, Jesus and his disciples came into the land of Judea, and there he was spending time with them and baptizing. Okay, what's the alleged contradiction here? Well, as Bart Ehrman and Gary Burge both say, the problem, quote unquote problem, I would say, is that Jerusalem's already in Judea. Jerusalem is within that segment of ancient Israel at the time of Jesus known as Judea. So why does it say after this, or after these things, Jesus and his disciples came, some translations have went, into the land of Judea? He's already in the land of Judea. So the idea is that there's some kind of contradiction here, that the editor didn't notice that he's already in the land of Judea, and so the editor is implying that the immediately preceding events did not occur in the land of Judea, and the editor's describing something that, in the editor's mind, happened after Jesus was somewhere else, not in Judea. Now, an achronological answer to this, which I do not in fact adopt, but which would not be erroneous, would be that after these things is just left vague, and it could be quite a bit after, when maybe Jesus had gone out of Judea, went and did something else, and then came back. But I don't even think that is the best explanation, the simplest explanation here. Now, there are multiple translations that can be given, so I'm going to just read some of these. The New International Version, which is a little bit looser as a translation. After this, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside, where he spent some time with them and baptized. That is the translation endorsed by D.A. Carson. You'll remember some weeks ago I was talking about the attempt to co-opt Carson to the idea that the Gospel of John sometimes changes facts and so forth, and he doesn't endorse that at all. So here we actually find him endorsing a harmonizing translation. Carson addresses the idea that these things happened in some completely different order, and if we wanted the actual chronological order, we would need to rearrange whole chunks of the Gospel of John. We'll see that as we go on in talking about these themes, that there are various proposals to just take whole chunks and transpose them. About those theories, Carson says each of these theories breeds new difficulties more serious than the one thereby resolved. So that's from his Pillar New Testament commentary, page 267. And then he says, it seems best to render the phrase as in NIV and assume that John simply means Jesus and his disciples went out from the urban to the rural areas of Judea. Let me read some other translations. Because, again, the NIV is not the most literal, though here it is endorsed by Carson. English Standard Version, the ESV. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. King James, after these things came Jesus and his disciples into the land of Judea, and there he tarried with them and baptized. Okay, so the literal, if you look at the Greek text, and I'll try to link to the translation page with all the different translations on Bible Hub and to the Greek text analysis page on Bible Hub for this verse. Literal would be into the Judean land, okay? Came into the Judean land, which could also be translated went into the Judean land, and then he was staying with them, that being his disciples, and baptizing. Okay, this gets translated sometimes remained with them, spent some time with them, and so forth. All right, so why do I say this doesn't even need to be a chronological narration? And certainly is not a seam indicating the activity of an editor. Well, the flow here is actually pretty good if you back up and you kind of look at the somewhat bigger picture. You've got Jesus with Nicodemus in Jerusalem proper, as you might say, right in the city. And then if we take this, as in the NIV, going out from the urban area to the wider region of Judea, you have then Jesus just leaves Jerusalem, goes and has this baptizing ministry, which chapter 4 clarifies was carried out, strictly speaking, by his disciples. You have a complaint about his popularity from the disciples of John the Baptist, and then John the Baptist is answering, he must increase and I must decrease. Basically, don't put us in competition with one another. They go and find John the Baptist. We don't know exactly where the location is, Aenon, near Salem, where John the Baptist was baptizing, but it looks like the two locations are not identical. So they have to come and say, hey, that guy, he's baptizing, and a lot of people are coming to him. And then in chapter 4, we have Jesus traveling to Galilee and passing through Samaria, and we have the woman at the well story when he passes through Samaria on the way to Galilee. So this fits really well that he's still in Judea carrying out this baptizing ministry, because John then narrates his actual trip, his journey from Judea north into Galilee. So the flow is very reasonable. It's not awkward at all. I would give a suggested comparison to the following statement. Suppose I'm narrating the activities of a band that gives concerts, okay? A rock band, let's say. I might say, they did a concert in Chicago, and after that, they went and spent some time in Illinois doing concerts. Okay? I'll do that again. They did a concert in Chicago, and after that, they went and spent some time in Illinois doing concerts. Okay, it's actually very similar. If I say that, am I implying that Chicago is not in Illinois? No, I'm not implying that. I'm implying that they went to other locations in Illinois, that they left the city itself and they went elsewhere, but still in Illinois. They had an Illinois tour, as you might say. All right? And if somebody came along and said, this sentence appears to be written by a person who either doesn't realize that Chicago is in Illinois, or who seems to be trying to put two things together that don't fit together. They must have gone somewhere else and then come back to Illinois. That doesn't follow. Now, the word land or country doesn't mean countryside per se as opposed to city. That's true. Okay, that's why the NIV's Judean countryside, which is also used in the ESV, is a slightly less literal translation. It just literally is the Judean land. But I think it's a legitimate understanding of what the verse is in fact saying. Jesus had all this stuff going on in Jerusalem, and then after that, he and his disciples went into Judea, more broadly speaking, somewhere else in Judea, where he was spending time with his disciples and baptizing. Another indication that this is correct, I don't want to lean too much on this, but I think it's worth mentioning. The statement, spent some time with them, which the English Standard translates remained there with them. King James translates tarried with them. It means, stayed, okay? If that does mean that he was specifically doing this to spend some time with his disciples in between baptizing and dealing with the crowds, this would fit a pattern that we see elsewhere in the Gospels. You'll remember that just before the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus is in Capernaum with his disciples. And I believe it was especially busy because it was right before Passover and there were all these people, these pilgrims coming through Capernaum. And he says, let's go away. Let's get out of here. And then, of course, the crowd follows him. So they get into a boat and they try to go to some place that's less populated, and they get followed anyway. But the point is, he leaves the urban center there of Capernaum. Similarly, during Holy Week, the Gospels make it very clear, Mark is explicit on this, that Jesus does things during the day in Jerusalem, and then when the evening comes, he goes to Bethany, and he's staying in Bethany. Now, Bethany's not that far away. You could think of it as a suburb of Jerusalem. It's a fairly easy walking distance, but the point is he wants to get out of the city, and he has meals with Mary and Martha and Lazarus and his disciples. So he's trying to get away a little bit from the city itself. This would fit that pattern, that after having been in Jerusalem, remember chapter 2 in John says that he did many signs there, so he's been doing miracles, and it's been so noticeable that Nicodemus comes to him and he has this conversation with him. So at this point, he goes out of the city somewhere else. Hopefully, he might get some more time alone with his disciples. I think that's plausible as an understanding of tarried there, stayed there, etc. And as before, he doesn't get to be completely alone with them because people come and then they carry out a baptizing ministry. So I think there are a lot of things in favor of this interpretation. I don't see any reason to postulate an error, and it's still more ridiculous to make up an entirely other person, an editor. You'll remember Occam's razor says that entities should not be postulated without necessity. They should not be multiplied without necessity. Well, here's an entity, this entirely separate person who's coming along and awkwardly stitching together John 3:22 with what has come before. I see no reason to do that. So we'll continue this series on alleged seams in the Gospel of John next time on the Lydia McGrew channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.